When people mention the word learning, we tend to have a pretty vivid image in our heads. Most of us think of a person sitting at a desk, either taking notes or idly listening to someone talk at them, giving them information. We have that picture because for all of us, we've all experienced learning as a passive experience in which someone gives us info and data to memorize, and then we discover how much we've learned when we're asked to regurgitate that information in the form of a test. Now, this isn't a video on how schools teach or how people learn. That's a whole other video for another time. What I do want to focus on is the end goal of learning. Though we're never really told this, we pick up implicitly through cause and effect that we've successfully learned something when we've passed an assessment covering a particular subject. But is that really learning? Is that the true end of education? As an educator myself, I must say, no, it's not. And I'm going to use the Neo-Stone Age genius, Dr. Stone, to make my case. What can Dr. Stone show us about the true purpose of learning? I'm the guidance guy, and finding the answer is going to be our learning goal for today. For those who don't know about this great anime, Dr. Stone covers the adventures of one Senku Ishigami, a genius high schooler who has awakened in a post-apocalyptic world in which every living thing has been turned to stone after an unknown event over 3,500 years ago. After getting the lay of the new world around him, he gets to work to finding a way to undo the petrifying process. And after months of trying, he finally discovers the right combination of chemicals and revives a few of his friends with the intent of rebuilding civilization with the power of science. But issues begin to arise when one of the survivors he brings back, Tsukasa Shishio, reveals he has no intention of bringing back what he calls the old world, but wants to bring about a new civilization built upon might makes right, with him at the top. And the major conflicts of the show become whether or not Senku can bring back the modernized world from scratch, and if his kingdom of science can overthrow the Empire of Might headed by Tsukasa. And the meat of the show comes from seeing Senku using his knowledge of science to do everything from creating hydraulic energy to healing others through medicine. But what does all this have to do with education and learning? I'm glad you asked. Throughout the anime, we get flashbacks of a young Senku indulge in his love of science. We often see him reading and studying and taking notes, all the things that a good student is supposed to do. And if that was everything we saw, it would just reinforce what we've been conditioned to believe about education, that the studying and the reading is what learning is all about, with a high score on an assessment being proof of your learning growth. But the truth is that all that note-taking and studying, they're merely parts of the learning process, not the totality of it. And even getting an A on a test is not evidence that you've learned something, it's just proof that you're good at memorizing information and reciting it on paper. Because how many times have you studied hard for a test, you put everything you got into acing that sucker, you got the A, only to forget everything said test covered in a matter of weeks? Can you really say that you learned that material if you can't even recall it later on? And that's at the core at our logical fallacy of our idea of education. Spitting out information on demand like a vending machine of knowledge is not the end goal of education. It's the application of that knowledge. And we see that in Dr. Stone. Senku may be a genius, but that doesn't mean that he was born with all that knowledge. He had to invest time to understand what he was reading, but it was only when he made experiments based on those theories that he was studying that true learning began. He didn't simply memorize the periodic table because his teacher wanted him to or to impress people. He did it so that he'd have a better understanding of the world around him, to know how different elements interacted with each other. Senku isn't able to rebuild civilization simply because he memorized a bunch of random science facts. He's able to do it because he understands how those facts apply to the real world and how different aspects of science interact with each other. Seeing how new information is relevant to our world and how it connects to our existing knowledge, that is true learning. About every year, I get at least one student ask me why they need to learn about a particular subject. Inevitably, at some point in the conversation, I'll hear some version of, "We don't even use this in real life." And even though the reasons why we don't use every single factoid we absorb in school in the real world is another video by itself, that phrase touches on what true education is about. If you don't apply new information in practical, real-life situations, then you aren't fully learning. You didn't learn how to walk by reading a book on it, you practiced until you got it right. You were taught about adding and subtracting, but it became learned when you used it to, say, count money. Now that's not to say that school is a waste of time and there's no point in getting good grades. The guidance guy ain't saying that. What I am saying though is that if you want a deeper relationship with whatever you're being taught, find a way to connect it with something you like. Hate math but love science? Those two subjects mesh together a lot more than you might think. And history can be incorporated into any subject. Just because the way we learn isn't a complete process doesn't mean that you don't have what it takes to finish the job. And that's something Senku shows us, the exhilarating end result of a full education. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments what other characters and franchises you'd like me to discuss next. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when the next video is ready. Until next time.